So welcome to the African View. I'm Bookie Shonuga. This show brings you perspectives. Gloria knows the African View started way back when we met, like donkey years ago. So this brings you perspectives of, from the African diaspora on global political development. And this year has been an unprecedented year, to say the least, with COVID-19 shutting down the world. Then the murder of George Floyd, climaxed by Trump, by the election, the 2020 election. So here we are. It's just really, it's like the bad episode of the worst episode of the Twilight Zone. That's what it feels like. We have not, we're still, in slumber or something. But it's a really a crossroad, a turning point in America's history. The way I look at this year, especially this moment, I look at it as a new dawn. There is no continuation of whatever America was until this point. That is just my perspective and some other people that I've been talking to. Something new has actually started, especially when George Floyd was murdered. And then with this election, the way people are turning out, it has just been phenomenal. And, I'm inviting the guests that I've invited to the show. They are from across the US, and they are well-informed people that have been following this election. And prior to the election, they're just experts in their own right that are very familiar with the political landscape of America and global politics. And I'm really grateful that they have joined me, last minute. That's how we do everything these days, is last minute. Now, Gloria, I'm gonna have you introduce yourself. Gloria Jolan Wilson, she's a veteran journalist, a colleague. She and I go way back. Gloria, thank you for calling in. You're calling in from Philly, from Pennsylvania. Yeah, Gloria, please give a brief introduction, and I'll go around and everyone would briefly introduce themselves, and we can really dive into this conversation. Thank you.
Well, good evening to everybody. I'm Gloria Doolin Wilson. I'm a transplant from New York and a bigger transplant from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So I have several incarnations. I'm a former UN correspondent, and that's how Bookie and I met. Or maybe it was before then. I'm a graduate, very proud graduate of Lincoln University back in the day when Lincoln University was considered the premier first HBCU in the United States, and we gave Africa two presidents, Nkrumah and Ezekwe. I brag on that all the time.
Yes.
She does, don't I? And I'm involved since I've moved to Philadelphia, I've been here 7 years now from New York. So I'm involved with the Mayor's Commission on African and Caribbean Immigrant Affairs. I'm also a member of an organization called ATTACK, which, stands for Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And I started an organization here in Philadelphia for this particular election year called Mobile Voters PA, because of the predator in chief who was trying to disrupt voting by dismantling the United States Postal Service, and had, because of his neglect with the pandemic that we've been going through, closed down all the polls in the senior citizens' homes so that seniors all of a sudden had no way of getting to the polls to vote. So we rented buses and got people in the community together. There are 8 Black women who did this, by the way. Don't know anything about cars or buses, but we did it. And we got people out to take people to and from the polls and make sure that they got to their right voting places. So that's what I do.
All right, thank you.
Can I add one thing, Bookie? Because Bookie knows my heart.
Yes.
While America is a very pivotal situation, and while we have prayed, or we've pretty closely much prayed the devil back to hell with our voting, I am as much concerned about what's happening on the continent as I am about what's happening here. And while I'm focusing on making sure that we get stuff right here, I will not turn a blind eye to the fact that my brothers and sisters on the continent are still kind of on the late show, even though we have the African Diaspora Congress and we have Madam Artikana Chiombo-Kwao also. So I'm involved on both sides of the ocean.
Very well. Thank you so much, Sister Gloria. So I want to go to Anthony Adeleke in Indianapolis. I believe that's where you're calling in from. So I have, of course, my colleagues and fellow Nigerians on this line because we're all over the United States. So Anthony, please, Adeleke, please go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I hope there is no background noise. I'm using an earphone. My name is Adetunji Anthony Adeleke. I'm an IT project manager and an avid development specialist for things related to Africa. And by the grace of God, I'm the current president for Nigerians in Diaspora organization. But what's more important is not about these titles, but the impact that we make. And I'm all about making sure that there is fairness in the society, there is equity and justice, and that Africans, considering our talents, we can reach our full potentials all around the world. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you. So I also have Dr. Joe is calling in from Houston. Dr. Joe, please introduce yourself briefly. Thank you. Hello, can you hear me? Dr. Joe, can you unmute yourself, please? Okay. So while I'm waiting for you, why don't I go to
okay.
Okay, you can hear me now. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm Dr. Odion Ojo. I live in Houston. And the lady that spoke earlier said she came from Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
I was in Norman in the 70s.
All right.
Yeah, when Billy Sims and Thomas Lott, when they were in school.
Okay, you're all dated.
About OU football.
You're
yes,
dated.
no. Yes,
I got a
Billy Sims
neighbor.
and Thomas Lott. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm here and talking about, I just had a conference or Zoom conference earlier, 2:00 this US time about the palliative warehouses in Nigeria. And because it was there was a new, what do you call it, Zoom webinar.
Okay.
So that's why I'm kind of tired because I was up late.
No problem. So you're Dr. Ojo, you're based in Houston, correct?
Right.
You're also part of the NIDO World Family, Nigerian Diaspora Organization World Family. Thank you so much for your time last minute to join us. So I have Chuks Eliano, brother Chuks Eliano, please go ahead and introduce yourself and where you're actually calling in from.
Thank you, Ms. Shonuga, and good evening, co-panelists and participants. My name is Chuks Leono, and I bring greetings from the Washington, D.C. suburb of Northern Virginia. And I quite relate to Sister Gloria's point out of Oklahoma. I started my life out there, Tulsa, Oklahoma. My other members of my family went to OU out of Oklahoma City. So normally goes through Norman on my way to Dallas and Houston. So I think we're all related, big family here. But I found the DC area to be the most cosmopolitan area of the United States. I am with the African Diaspora for Good Governance. And as an organization, we build relationship with candidates, lawmakers, policymakers, including incumbent administration, to influence public policy decisions. So while folks are out mobilizing, we do the strategy behind the scenes to make sure the votes truly get counted, that the administration truly fulfills its promises to the constituency. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stephanie.
You are welcome, brother Chuks.
Hello, Chief Adeleke, how are you?
I do. I'm here. Thanks.
I think Stephanie also is on. Stephanie, would you please kindly introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Stephanie Arthur. I am a member of the United African Coalition along with Bookie Shonuga, but I'm also a part of the Ghana Diaspora Public Affairs Collective. And so professionally, I'm a policy analyst with a focus on health equity and health advocacy. And I am based in the DMV area. So I agree with you, Brother Chooks, that this place is one of the most cosmopolitan, diverse, inclusive areas. And so I love being in the heart of politics. And so thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the introduction. And as we have people join, we'll introduce them. It is, I'm really grateful that you all have joined me this last minute on a Friday night. This is the African View. I'm Bookie Shonuga. And this is what I had called the morning after, but it's turning out to be more than the morning after, but days after. And as we're speaking now, this election has not been called. But most importantly, I wanted to engage on what has happened, especially in this election. I mean, since Trump came to office 4 years ago, it's been a nightmare every day. Every day, there hasn't been, nothing settled. But this election, it's a repudiation. It's looking like a repudiation, a referendum, supposed to be on Donald Trump. But as we can see, we're all being on the ground, especially Stephanie and I were in Philly. I think she stayed longer than I had, or she came back. And Gloria is also in Philadelphia. But we can see that this country is almost split down the middle. So that goes to show where America is right now, and whether people are voting on issues. The issues seem to be polar opposite. And this election is just showing that we thought, I mean, some of the people in my camp, because I'm definitely a supporter of Biden-Harris, we had thought that it was going to be a landslide election, but it's not turning out to be so. And it's like, it's amazing that if Joe Biden has not been picked as the candidate, I don't even think that would be as close as we are to winning this election the way it is now. So on that note, I'm going to go to, Stephanie, you've been on the ground. So please, and as a policy person, I'm part of the United African Coalition. I'm also a co-founder of the United African Coalition. I'm actually the executive director of the organization as we speak. So Stephanie, you in the thick of this, tell us what is going on from your vantage point. What are you seeing on the ground? Why is this election so contentious? Not that we don't know why, but why is it so close?
Well, so one of the things that I think is indicative of kind of the small margin between the two candidates is that people weren't going out to vote for Joe Biden in mass because they wanted to necessarily get rid of Trump. I think there was a faction of blue supporters, Joe Biden supporters, but Trump still has a strong base. And I think it tells a story about how Trump's base and, just typically Americans feel about some of the issues that are happening around race relations, around healthcare, around, police reform. Some people are very conservative around those issues. And so it's not like the whole country went to go vote for Joe Biden en masse. That's why you see kind of this, small slither of, lead that Joe Biden has up against Trump. And I think that that's very telling. But just to speak about being on the ground, I think the media plays a very big role in being very hyperbolic and, using fear tactics to scare people. Because, as somebody who did voter protection, I went to the polls outside of the Philadelphia, city limits, right? So going out into the counties, rural and suburban areas where you think that Trump supporters are going to be there, they're going to be, visible, they're going to be electioneering. People were actually very, very civil with each other. No one was wearing a Biden shirt or a Trump shirt. So you didn't know who was supporting who. People were respectful. And so a lot of what I think are stories to get us very scared. The cities are boarded up. I just don't think that there's going to be some kind of all-out riot if this does not swing in the way that I guess the Trump supporters would like. I do think, though, when you come into metropolitan cities, when you look at Black and brown people, they are ready for change. That was very obvious. People, were committed to voting for the Democratic Party, for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We know that her candidacy is historic. So there are a lot of reasons why people were willing to vote for the blue ticket. But what I am trying to say is there wasn't this visible contention that I think we expected on election day, throughout this election, the way that the media had made it. So being on the ground, I saw something different from what I was expecting based on what the media told me.
Right, and also, you know, I'm a member of the media. I'm an independent journalist, and I'm still a current member of the U.S. Foreign Press Center. So I don't want to be defensive, but the media is the good, the bad, and the ugly. But we still need the media. I mean, the media that will spin fake news, well, there are traditional media, whether they're mainstream or ethnic media, that just want to bring the story as they say it, as it's happening. So I really want to speak, you know, in that capacity as a journalist, that we are reporting what we are saying, not just making up stories. But we still need the media. I mean, all over the world, we need the media in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of actually covering the news analysis and analyzing and really presenting, you know, an unbiased perspective. You know, and that's the role of the media, because the media have been made out to be the bad guys, but we are very important, and what we do is very important. On that note, I'm gonna go to, I know a couple of you guys are driving, and I know you're tired. So let me go to Anthony in Indianapolis, and tell us what's happening in your, you know, from your vantage point in your community with this election. A lot of Nigerians are in Indianapolis. And I know that some Nigerians also vote for Trump. I hope you're not one of them. And if you are, that's fine.
I'm not. Thanks. It's so glad to see your face and hear from all our people. Good to see everyone and the excitement in the here. I also had an interview with AIT earlier today on elections 2020. And those were also the same set of questions. There seems to be a new atmosphere in the here that as things will transition from where things have been in the last 4 years, because we are very optimistic that there's going to be a change in regime, despite all these court suits or whatever. But as you all know, Indiana is a red state. It was the state that actually delivered the first 11 votes, delegate votes to President Trump. But on the irony, as it happens in most of the other parts of the country, the city capital is a blue city. Indianapolis is blue, and you will realize that some of the things we've discussed, and it's also shapens, is the fact that why are these urban centers blue while the rural and the suburbs remain conservative? It's all about knowledge and information. It's about awareness and exposure of people to the realities of current life, of modern life, and how things are supposed to be in a more civilized society, rather things being more progressive rather than just maintaining the status quo. So one thing I'll say is that we are happy that things are happening out there where it matters. Especially, I want to thank you for those out on the field. I heard that you've been in Philly, making sure that you got people on ground, you got people aware, you got people how to actually perform their civic responsibilities. In our groups here, we also try to do the same. So the mood here in Indianapolis is good as the urban center, and it's a blue environment. The mood here is very optimistic. We are just waiting for the announcement after the voting. But despite that, the more important thing is ability to be able to bring everyone together, either red or blue.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ojo, you're in Houston. Please, can you weigh in on this? Houston is Houston a red state, or is it a red?
Yeah, Houston is a red state.
It's a red state. Well,
But
that's another thing with this color coding, right? We'll dive into that, because that's tired.
I know.
The two-party system is tired. The color coding is tired. There are issues that are overlapping issues that people can relate to across the aisle. So it has nothing to do with this, red and blue state that we've been dealing with for a long time now. But please go ahead.
Yeah, well, the county is turning blue because of a lot of Hispanic people moving in, and you have a lot of Nigerians over here. Although they said there are some Nigerians that are trying to vote. That wanted Donald Trump,
Right.
mainly because of this, say the pastors talking about, abortion and gay or what have you. So my question to them is, listen, what the so-called conservatives don't want is, they don't want the government to pay for abortion. So don't let them deceive you, talking about, no abortion or what have you. So if their kid wants to have abortion, are they going to kill the child? So, so that's I keep telling some of them. But anyway, to cut a long story short, everybody's happy, and hey, we are just waiting. Because the good thing about this is this: if they had announced the election, Biden as the president on that night, let's say the election went quickly that night, yes, a lot of the people probably will have been rioting or doing whatever. But now, since it's taking so long, it's making people to, get used to it, that, okay, we are lost. Okay, we are losing. Okay, it's like getting to it, like, okay, it's over. Although he's still, I know Trump is still going to want to say or do whatever he wants to do, but it's not going to be as bad as if it had happened that night. So I'm happy about what is going on right now. There's nothing you can do. Like Biden said, we have ways to get rid of trespassers. You cannot say, you're not going to leave. This is not the third world country, or this is not Russia.
Hmm.
So, he cannot intimidate anybody. So I just don't believe.
Okay, so
that he's saying.
Okay.
It's over.
Well, it's not.
So I was telling me about, a Caucasian guy. Isawana? I didn't hear you.
Hello? No. I said, go ahead. I say it's not
Okay.
over. Lady sings. I'm just, but we.
Oh, okay. Well, the Caucasian was telling one of my employees, who happens to be Hispanic, saying that, we're going to riot, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So the person told the Caucasian, saying, okay, Donald Trump has security and people to protect him. Do you have any?
Right?
I love it.
So this is not 1700 or 1800, whereby it was only Caucasian people that had guns. Everybody's got guns these days.
Right.
So you cannot intimidate anybody. It doesn't work that way anymore. It's 2020.
That's right. So I want to circle back with you. So Gloria, please go ahead. You are in Philly. You tell us what is happening that's led to these. We are aware of what led to this election, again, the boiling point where we are now with COVID, as a catalyst. And then George Floyd was murdered. People have just had it enough. By the time George Floyd was murdered, people had stayed indoors so long that they were looking for a reason to come out anyway. And the world gave them, America gave them a legitimate reason to come out. And they came out, in millions to protest. So Gloria, what is your view on this? Being an American and also African-American, and be part of the civil rights movement, graduate of Lincoln College, and you live in Philly. So you really have the heart of what's happening. So can you just share your perspectives on this?
I can, but I also want to say to my Texas brother that being from Oklahoma, they would have been really hard pressed to have come out with guns, because Black people had guns in Oklahoma from 1835.
I hear you.
It would have been one dumb move for any of that madness to happen. We are at the eye of the storm, because this also happens to be Joe Biden's campaign headquarters. So when the predator in chief decided that they were going to dismantle the Postal Service, they started it in Philly because this is the birthplace of the United States Postal Service. And anybody who thinks Donald Trump is dumb is dumb. Because Donald Trump is not dumb. He's very conniving. He's very calculating. And everything he does to demoralize. And people don't understand that. He also is very divisive, which is obvious from what he's been doing to pit his Caucasoid cousins, AKA rednecks to those of us in Texas and Oklahoma, against Black people and other people of color. And that means when I say people of color, I mean Indian, Asian, African American. And that has been their MO from the day he got in. But I don't want anybody to think that it started with Trump. Because prior to the end of Obama's administration, when it came time to have Merrill Garland at least considered for the Supreme Court, everybody knows what happened.
Right.
People need to understand that the predatory actions on the part of the United States Senate started before Trump became the predator in chief. And all he did was made it possible for them to get away with some of their most debased designs with him as the front man.
Right.
Because that's all he is. He's the front man. And everything he's doing, if they didn't like it, they would have shut him down a long time ago because they have the power. And what they did was they empowered him to be the exact epitome of evil that he turns out to be. Now, Philadelphia gets a double dose of it because when he came into Philly to address what he thought would be a packed audience in Philadelphia, it was about as packed as the audience was in Oklahoma just before Juneteenth. There, he got in there and he came to Independence Mall. He got up there and he started running his number, and a Black woman got up to ask him a question, and he proceeded to try to interrupt her. And she said, "Excuse me, I'm still talking." And then he realized, you in Philly, nobody gives a cookie about what you say because we don't even want you here. We don't even know how you got from the car into the Mall of Independence because you're not welcome because you don't represent what that mall stands for. Right. So the attitude, you don't have to preach to the choir when you tell Philadelphians to not support Trump, but what you do have to deal with in the case of some of the younger kids and maybe even some of the more jaundiced elders was an apathy. Right. But we were able to even get beyond the apathy because when they finally opened up early voting in Philadelphia, which started on September the 29th, for the first time in the history of Pennsylvania, they had early voting. Those lines were around the block. Those were the pictures that you did not see on TV. People turning out early and late, Sundays after church, Saturdays, and anytime that they could get there. They had started out with 17 and then had to expand it, and they had to expand it to the point that they started putting them in the arenas and every place else because people started showing up. By the time by the time October 27th came around, 80% of Philadelphians, Black and white, had already voted, which really blew everybody away. Now, in the meantime, the last time that he tried to come in, he got booed away. So he went to Bucks County. He went to Lehigh County. He went to Erie County. All of these are your little pockets of racism. And that last little scene that you saw where he left his people stranded on the tarmac in the freezing cold because where he was a very remote part, not close, maybe an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia. Yeah, so the mood of the people here was they've lost their homes, they've lost their jobs, right. COVID has happened. Most people did not get the stimulus that he was supposed to have gotten. When I say most, I really literally mean most people did not get the stimulus. A lot of people who were supposed to at least be protected from eviction are now living in tents on the side of some of the highways here in Philly because that did not happen. So everybody wants him out.
Right now is a good segue into the crux of the topics, the ideology, the agenda. If people vote by agenda, this is a good segue into that. So the African American community or population, especially Black women, have delivered this country for so long, especially in this election as well, right? So if not for African Americans, if not for Congressman James Clyburn, that resuscitated, Joe Biden's campaign, it was dead on arrival, right? So knowing how much power that African Americans and how much they have endured and how much power they really have, why is it that African Americans doesn't seem to be able to leverage these? I know it has something to do with the system, but you can answer it better than I can. Why is it that coming to the aid and delivering these elections over and over and over again, turning out in record numbers, especially now, to vote to deliver Joe Biden, why don't we get more than we ever give? Why?
Because we don't demand it, one. And number two, I'm going to say this about African Americans, and I'm going to also say it about Africa.
Right.
Because we both got the same problem in terms of what we don't do for ourselves. And it's a problem here and it's a problem there. And that is, we got the damn 40 acres and a mule back in the 1800s that didn't do anything because Lincoln was shot for promising it. So therefore, as soon as they assassinated him, excuse me, that whole thing ended. We stood together. If we hadn't stood together as a people and worked together as a people, we would not be here right now. But the minute we as a people begin to really develop what we need to develop for ourselves as Black people, what do you think happens, Bookie? The Caucasoids start coming in and trying to undermine, destroy, and everything, to the point that it becomes demoralizing. You can demand, and we have demanded. It's not like we didn't. I mean, I was here for the Black Power era. I was a militant in the Black Power era. And Bookie, you've known me a long time. I've had this natural that I have now since 1966. Okay, in reference to the fact that I was not trying to identify with the Caucasoids. But the bottom line is that until and unless we really structure ourselves in a way that not only are we asking or demanding for what we want, but at the same time, we're building what it is we want to have, we're not going to make it. I mean, you can sit here and say, I want cleaner schools, I want better schools and things like that. I had better education in Oklahoma because I didn't have one white teacher ever. But I had Black teachers who were devoted to making sure I knew more than they ever knew in the white schools. And so we lucked out in Oklahoma. A lot of kids from Texas used to come into Oklahoma to go to our schools because we had better educational systems. Same thing with Arkansas, Missouri, surrounding areas would come into Oklahoma City, not Oklahoma, its state, Oklahoma City, because our educational system was just better because we were running it. We not only have to talk about them, we got to talk about us, just like you said. And the us problem is we're still waiting for them to give us our 40 acres and a mule instead of doing what we need to do to translate that into what we need for the 21st century.
Well, hopefully that's where
so if I may add.
Gloria, just let me go to Brother Chooks Eliano because he's been waiting, patiently waiting. So, Brother Chooks, I really want you to weigh in on this. We are African immigrants. We're well educated. Of course, we identify as Black first. Same question I posed to Sister Gloria. How come we're not able to leverage these, capital, whether it's intellectual capital, human resources capital, whatever you name it? How come we have not been able to leverage that? And what do you think has changed now? Or do you think anything actually is going to change?
Thank you. And I'm glad I'm getting an opportunity to chime in on the last statement from Ms. Dillon Wilson. The key point there, which she made, and that I would like to expand upon, is that we fail to demand. But let me go beyond that statement to say that demanding goes beyond marching. I think in the last century, well, let me not say century, but in the last several decades, stretching all the way back to the civil rights movement, the march protests were used very effectively to highlight the issues that are going on within the communities. However, what is not being highlighted, if I may call up one topic that everyone on the right seem to often want to talk about, which is abortion. And I want to highlight it not because I am in support or against it, but I want to highlight it in the area of, has anyone, both on the Republican and or the Democratic side, ever looked into the causes, the root causes of why anybody would be interested in abortion? So for some reason, there is a focus on the sin, but there's never any focus or remedy for the root causes of this sin. So taking that back in a broad context to the Africa and the African diaspora communities, we seem to engage in highlighting our problems and our issues. But then as soon as the election is over, I saw this with Obama, I saw it with Clinton, I saw it with all the way back to Ronald Reagan, where we come up, we mobilize, we coalesce, and we come together and say, we do this, we do this. But actually, the real work begins right after the elections. That's not to go home. The real work begins not on the protest marches on the street. It's actually done in the conference rooms and the various backroom deals that are negotiated. So what we are lacking, or what we need, are leaders, whether it be the African American community or it be the Latino community, who are equally as confused, or the continental Africa community, or our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean. I'm not even touching our brothers and sisters in Asia. So there is a fundamental problem where there is a lack of leadership. And for some reason, in the continental Africa community, this leadership issue often want to translate with, I want to be the boss. No, that's not what leadership is. Leadership is about pulling people and bringing them together to achieve a common purpose. So once we agree, we all know what the problem is. In the inner cities, we know what the problems are. In the countryside, we know what the problems are. In the suburbs, we know what the problems are. We just need to come together and say, here are our issues. So is there a solution? I say yes. Biden is going to win. I differ with everybody else. For those who follow me on Facebook, Biden will win in a landslide. It is going to be painstaking. Trump actually created the problem everyone is seeing right now. It wasn't Biden, and it is not the cities of Philadelphia or Atlanta or Maricopa County. That they are not the cause of this problem. Donald Trump deliberately created it because he was looking for a pathway to go to the Supreme Court. But I'm also very confident that the Supreme Court will beat him back, because this is not 2000 when Al Gore was denied an opportunity. Right. So we need leadership, and we need to come together and itemize those things we want, and then hold him accountable for delivering those things. So the Black women have always been there, but I'm not sure that the Black women have gone into the boardrooms after each election to demand what they want. That's where the problem is, and that's where the solution begins.
Absolutely.
Can I comment on that?
I'm sorry. Bookie, let me just say one thing. We have, throughout the ages, Africa and African Americans, we have had sages, we've had wise people with vision who have been teaching us things that are still true right now that we have yet to pick up on. I mean, I look at, he mentioned our Asian brothers and sisters, and I look at what they're doing, and I look at the fact that we had a brother here just 100 years ago by the name of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was the most powerful Black man on the planet. Didn't have radio, didn't have television, didn't have internet, didn't have any of that stuff, but was able to get 12 million Black people who wanted to leave America, go back home to Africa, reunite with Africa. But in the meantime, those same 12 million people started their own businesses, started their own hospitals, started their own schools, built their own homes. They did it while they were planning on leaving. They didn't sit there and talk about what white people did and didn't do. They started doing and being the solution to their own problem. And then they pooled their money, their resources, their time, their talent, and their intelligence. It's documented. Scared the bejeebers out of these people over here. They could not stand to lose 12 million Black people. We really could not stand to be here, and we're still stuck here dealing with the same crap, excuse my mouth, everybody, that we were dealing with 100 years ago in this same country. The only difference is now we got internet, Now we have television and Facebook and a whole lot more in stuff. And we are still trying to figure out what this man solved for us 100 years ago.
Right.
And that I find incredulous and ridiculous on our part.
Right. And these, you know, further conversation started by saying that we don't have, we're not making demands. So I want to go, Stephanie is a policy, you know, specialist. So in terms of we're not making demands, I mean, now that it's a new dawn, are there processes in place? I mean, like you were talking about Marcus Garvey. So there are so many templates to follow. So what are the issues? Why aren't we following those templates that have been successful? I mean, understanding that the system, the structure, you know, the structural racism that's left us out of the system. So in terms of getting funding and whatever, you know, we need in some cases to really be part of the system, to be successful, to start our own businesses, to be able to unify and so on. So there are things in place that actually have made that impossible. Let's not lose sight of that. That even when people want to strategize, when people want to be unified, and when people want to pull their resources, the power that be is made it such a way that it's not so easy to be able to pull the resources that need what we need to do.
Well, they do undermine and sabotage what we do. Right. I mean, look what they did. Yeah. You have a Black president, and if it had not been for the fact that you had Farrakhan, and nobody wants to admit that.
Right.
But if you hadn't had Farrakhan standing behind him, that brother would have been gone. Because those guys were not giving him a free pass.
Right.
They don't want to admit that, but the thing about it is everybody who knows what was happening in Chicago, all Farrakhan did was stop talking, but that didn't mean he stopped taking care of business. We still have to learn how to turn, as Jesse Jackson says, turn to each other. Right. And stop turning on each other.
Very important.
Okay. And it's not that difficult, except that psychologically, somewhere back in there, we have been so traumatized by all we went through slavery and all you went through colonialism, that we still got that little bitty block in the back of our heads that says when we start working together, something's wrong. Yeah. And we will sabotage our own situation.
Stephanie.
Let me just add that, you know, so that's a very layered, I guess, concept or topic. The reality is that all Black people are not monolithic, not politically monolithic, right? And so, you know, what you have are, you know, Black conservatives, Black entrepreneurs who, you know, for them, their interest is taxes and you know, funding around their businesses, and they don't have necessarily the same connection to people who may be falling below the poverty line, right? And so for that demographic or that population, issue around poverty, housing, school, jobs, then obviously the criminal justice system is an important issue to them. So I make that point that, you know, Black people are different, I guess, sectors of life. And so politically, we all don't necessarily have the same interest in issues. The challenge, though, is when we look at other groups like the Latino community or the Asian community, they're all buying into the narrative of Latinos rising. So what that means is they all get on code, right? Even if your issue is not my issue, I'm still going to be unified with you so we can get on code, so the racial group can advance. And I think that that's where we struggle as, you know, unfortunately, as Black folk, Black, you know, immigrants, as well as African Americans. And in terms of policy, you know, one of the things that I think has been a real challenge for Black people is that in terms of policy, a lot of the language is so inclusive of every other group that it doesn't necessarily focus on us. So when you have language like people of color, minorities, right? Other groups, you know, can swoop in and take advantage and leverage that, right? And it still puts us at the bottom of the list. So you look at issues, or you look at diversity initiatives like affirmative action, or diversity initiatives in the workplace or in school. Those were really created on the backs of African American issues, right? But because the language had been so watered down, who they were trying to service had been more inclusive, other groups were able to take advantage of it. So I'm just making a small point in that situation. And I think that that translates to a lot of the policy that we see in other areas. So for instance, with COVID-19, what COVID exposed, this wasn't new, but COVID exposed that Black folk in particular had always been disproportionately impacted by a lot of the infectious diseases, a lot of the, the health issues. This has always been going on because there's always been bias in how medical professionals have dealt with us, right? They think that we can handle a lot of this pain, and so they're not necessarily as sensitive to us as they are to other groups, right?
I don't think they care.
Policies like that, I think, have to be reformed. The language in it has to be changed in order for us to move forward in 2021, where Black people become the focal point of policy that's going to benefit the racial group. So,
but you know what, Stephanie, here's the thing, and I agree with what you're saying in terms of relanguaging the situation, but I have a blog, by the way, everybody. My blog is called Eclectically Black News. Okay, and it's about Black people regardless of who you're mixed with or who you think you're mixed with or what part of the world you come from. As long as you're Black, it's about you. The main thing is we know that the policy is going to always be biased against us. I stopped them from calling us minorities. I stopped them from, now when I say I, it doesn't mean me personally, but I did stop them from saying it in my presence. I stopped them from calling us colored or people of color. We're Black, like it or not. We may be Black from Africa, Black from the Caribbean, Black from South America, or here Black, but we're Black. Just like white people call themselves white. And the bottom line is we now need to be selfish. It's called enlightened self-interest. And our enlightened self-interest means regardless of whether the person's got a tax issue or he's in the real estate development, or if he thinks he's a captain of industry or whatever the heck else we think we are, you're still Black. When you came out that way. And so you're that plus whatever good you're doing or whatever bad you're doing. And everything needs to be, yes, take care of yourself, but also once you've got your stuff, do not leave without making sure that you help somebody else or somebody's else move forward. This is how other cultures do it. This is how the East Indians do it. It's how the Japanese do it. This is how the Chinese do it. This is how, this is how white people do it. You see it every day. And the thing about it is we need to buy a clue and start working that clue.
And I agree with you. I mean, and as we all know, we live in different parts of the United States, right? So we see the economic disparity by zip codes in our community through healthcare, through housing, through education. This is not something new. Even when African immigrants come here and we become well educated, and some people move into the suburbs, or maybe they're already living in suburbs, as opposed to those of us that live in the inner cities, we're still able to see the disparity as far as zip code, as far as how these, funds are, divided, and our children in our public schools still get a short end of the stick, right? They don't have quality education. They don't have the resources that they need. They live in housing that's not, up to par, that needs to be better housing and so on. So when we talk about, intellectual capital or resources, so coming together to, pool our resources, that's one big component. But on the real deal, on the ground level, when people are going to school in our community and you see the huge disparity in terms of quality education, that's where it starts. So when we talk about pulling our resources, how do we, from these conversations, I mean, I know most of you, all of you, and some of us are doing things in our community to make sure that we are bringing a chair to the table. We're no longer, in terms of making demands, we're no longer asking to be included, because that's never going to happen. But we know what time it is. We have lived here long enough and we know what time it is. So how are we now coming together to pull the resources? What are the strategies in place that we are putting in place to make sure that we bring a chair to the table?
We got to get rid of all of the Black leaders, in my personal opinion. Right? We got to get rid of all of the selfish Black leaders, because they walk in to the Oval Office, right, really negotiating their own benefits and not necessarily for the group. So I would rather start seeing groups, advocacy groups walk in. So, the NAACP, I'm pretty sure that they have access into the Oval Office when Obama was there. But the NAACP, coalitions of Black women, coalitions of Black immigrant groups, and not necessarily, and I say this respectfully, but not necessarily your Al Sharptons of the world or your Jesse Jacksons of the world. And it's not like I have an issue with them per se, but they do not, one, they're disconnected in my personal opinion, but they don't speak for the racial group or even sex of the racial group. And what happens is when you have one person championing a message, it doesn't really, I think, solve the problem. I really don't think there's room to negotiate the policy or to negotiate the issues in the best interest of the group that's impacted, and the reality of what government is. I think having that one Black leader, the token Black leaders has hurt us, in my personal opinion. But I open up the floor to my colleagues to see what they say.
So I agree with Stephanie, but I also would caution that before we get to the stage where we get rid of them, we also need to prepare the ground, right? We need to groom our people. Exactly. We need to set them up and put them in a position where they can then take the opportunity. So what has been happening in the past, and I think that's where Stephanie is coming from, is that we do all the protest marches on the street, and then we have one or two persons that go behind our backs and go do the negotiations. And then we're not there, we're not sitting there, we don't know what they said, we don't know what they got offered, we don't know what was agreed to, and then they come out and then they do the next one and then the next one. So what we need to change now, and I think that the critical mass is to our advantage. We've had a Black male president. We are about to get a Black female vice president. We have lots of Black people in Congress, as well as in various agencies of the government. So the critical intelligence is already there in terms of our people and the groundswell that they bring. What is not there, and the part that I want to challenge everyone, you can come join us at ADGG. We can work as partners or as sponsors or as separate groups. But the key difference, and this is where the Latino groups as well as the Asian groups beat the African Americans and the African diaspora groups, is it does not matter. In fact, let me even add the Jewish groups. So let's take the Jewish guys as an example. They are different bunch of small little groups or synagogues, but they speak from one talking point. That's what we need to develop, is a narrative that covers our issues, and it doesn't matter whether it's Gloria that's saying it, or Adeleke is saying it, or Shonuga is saying it. As we're reading from the same script and saying the same things, because the confusion and the wedge that is driven into our community comes when I go say one thing and then somebody else comes and counters what I say, and then they begin to look at, aren't they from the same community? They didn't talk to each other before coming to ask for this fund or for this grant or apply for this loan. So, and I see that on a daily basis. So my recommendation, and this is where the African Diaspora for Good Governance came up from, and that's how we came about, is we need to come up with a straightforward narrative. Make sure we communicate that narrative across the board. We are willing to consult, whether it be Al Sharpton, whether it be Farrakhan. It doesn't matter if you're Black, you're African. That's our philosophy, and we will consult widely. By the way, Dr. Julius Garvey, son of Marcus Garvey, is our board member, and our goal is to not be in a rush to get the crumbs off the table. Our goal is to work harder to try and find out how the sausage is actually made. Sure, the crumbs will feed you for a day or two, but until you know how the sausage is made, my brothers and sisters, they will continue to try to undermine our interest. And the way they do that is by scattering us and making sure we cannot come together as a collective. The Latinos use their churches. African Americans have more churches than I can imagine. In my home country in Nigeria, I know a 1 mile strip that there are 20 churches in 1 mile, 20. Yet, as we speak, none of those pastors in the last 6 months said anything on how to get Joe Biden elected. They were all talking about Trump, though, because Trump was giving them money. So we need to learn how to come together and speak with one voice. The solution is there, but the reason it's not resonating is because we're all speaking differently. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I agree with that. Thank you. So when we're not representing our own individual selfish interests, when we are representing the collective, and that's the way to come together, because then the agenda is not for one person. The agenda is to serve the interest of the larger community, right? And that's what we have not done well. And I'm glad that you talk about ADDG is one way to really bring all these other small organizations together and really work, for common good. Because I remember before this, leading to the Biden's nominee, actually as a presidential candidate, there were so many splinter group that are, having different Zoom meetings, and we all, going after the same thing. We all want to serve the interests of our community. We all speaking from our experiences in this country, or even for the African American family that were born here, we are still experiencing the same thing in the community. So there's no reason why we should not come together and consolidate those, whatever the objectives are, which are, they're always interlocked and they're always, common ground. We need to find the common ground and bring all this organization into one fold so that we can present one front and formulate whatever policy or agenda rather that we want. And then, get experts that will work with that. So I want to go to Adetunji Adeleke is still on the line, because the African, I want to go to the Nigerian community, for instance. You all know these, we're like the most educated Africans and so on, but we're so divisive as well. We're well educated, and we have, the colossal power in terms of, how do I put it? Intellectual capital, you name it. But we're not consolidating all of that. When we send money to Nigeria, we spend, I don't know what number they're using now, maybe $45 million a year and so on. But we keep putting our family members on our payroll instead of investing in the country. And what I've said is that once each one of us dies, which is inevitable, that money flow stops right there. Yeah. How are we investing? How are we investing in our community here? Even our immediate community, let alone investing at home. So, but Adetunji, I'm gonna go to you. With the Nigerian in the diaspora in your, in Indianapolis, what do you see people working together? What are you getting from that in terms of what we're talking about now, in terms of working collective to really get where all we need to go, make the demand that we need to make, and make sure that we stay on track, on the course rather.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Great question, Mrs. Shonuga. The truth of the matter is that we have not built enough trust amongst ourselves to be able to do things together. And it's sad that despite all the times we've had, the great memories we have from wherever we are coming from, we cannot galvanize those into a concrete vision that can work for all of us. It's still about individuals, and it's almost like we are, instead of cooperating, we are competing. People still see each other as competitors, as tribal competitors, or ethnic groups, or individual competition, which is not in our own best interest. So many things we do, if we had put money together, we would have been able to have African community banks here. We would have been able to have cooperative and credit unions and things like that. That leads to more business and opportunities for our people to galvanize and to improve their economic lot. So until we are able to break through on some of this, and what our people want to see is some people making a success before they join. So it could take a small group of people leading by example and actually breaking through before others will join them. So because that's just the character of our people, and that mindset may not change overnight, but we should not stop. It's not an easy task. It's happened over generations, but uh, it took a while before we had the first Black president in the USA. So, and it didn't take it didn't happen if people quitted. So it's just the collective effort, and there will be a time that the last straw will break the camel's back, and some people will break through. Maybe our incoming generations, we need to mobilize the younger people to move away from the lessons we've learned by working more together than working apart. So we need to bring them more together and facilitate that for them so that they can do things beyond what our previous generation and our current generation have done to actually foster that unity and working together to make great goals and economic opportunities for themselves.
Well said. Thank you. Dr. Ojo, are you still on? Okay, I think you might have dropped off. I think that we, with these, little group here, when I mean little, I mean, we have a lot of power, really. But with these individuals here, we know.
Up in a few.
Excuse me. What were you saying?
I made at 8 o'clock.
So, I mean, we all common denominator, so we know what community we all come from, and the might that's behind all of us. So we're really extraordinary people together here, and we really should find a way to leverage the power that we have right on this platform that we're speaking now. And I know what AGDG is. I'm not sure if that's the acronym. I apologize if I'm not saying it correctly, but they already have a platform that's structured with a specific agenda. So we have the United African Coalition also with a specific agenda, and there are other organizations as well that have objectives to serve the larger community. So we can all come together and find a way to really work together, and that's the only way at this juncture. And it's really, really very important that we do that. And I think what's also happening, in my opinion, an observation, is that after having lived in a country for over 30 years and have children here, we begin to we understand the structure and the system, and also how to work the system. And I think all of us on this platform now, especially we're mostly immigrants, or we're Americans now, yeah, but we know now how we can move forward and help the community at large. I think we are at that juncture now. And with the Biden, how do I put this, victory, which should be happening any time from now, we already started engagement. Everyone on this platform, I know, Chooks, your organization is doing that. United African Coalition that Stephanie is part of, we are already doing that in terms of finding the linkage to engage the Biden-Harris, how do I say?
Administration.
So we want to go back, and Gloria is also doing that on the ground, and then we invite other people in. The reason I say that is that when we talk about demanding, we know exactly what we want, and we know how we should go about getting it. So this time around, we're not asking to be invited to the table. We're really coming to the table with solid policy agenda, with recommendations, and see which organization actually is best equipped to make this happen, so we can all work together. That's what needs to happen. So does anyone want to respond to that before I touch another topic in terms of agenda?
I want to say something about what you're talking about. One of the things that I've noticed, my late husband was from Panama. His mother was from Barbados and his dad was Jamaican. He was born in Panama. He came here when he was 12. So I always call my kids Jamaica Benjaminians. Okay. Now, there's a difference when you come from, even with Africa, or especially with Africa, where you come from somewhere where everybody around you is Black. They're running things, they're owning things, they're your teachers, things like that. And so you don't feel nearly as threatened and even disenfranchised, even though that might still be happening, as you do when you've got a superstructure, infrastructure that is permeating everything that you do. So you come here, and it's wonderful because you guys come with a sense of empowerment because you are used to at least negotiating and dealing with people who are you. Whereas African Americans have been traumatized, we've been brainwashed, we've been beaten back, lied to, and all kinds of every little piece of stuff. So when you see brothers and sisters coming from other places and who really get it, because you can see it from a different vantage point, and we see it from, I would almost say, a vantage point of defeat on the one hand, but resentment on our part, because this is what's happening in terms of our resentment of the infrastructure that continues to do what they do. One of the things that I learned dealing with my husband's family is that they come in, they know they're in a hostile environment, so they hunker down and they get the job done. I say the same thing about my Haitian brothers and sisters. They come here. When I first moved to New York from Oklahoma, Haiti was running Brooklyn. Every Haitian or every other Haitian already owned their own home and owned their own business. And I think we would say the same thing for my Caribbean brothers and sisters, where African Americans were still talking about what we couldn't do and what we wanted to do and how come it wasn't getting done. The problem is that you need to, or we would, we need to be coalescing in terms of what you know from a standpoint of empowerment and what we need to know, and vice versa. The issue is, like Harriet Tubman said, I would have saved more people if they knew they were slaves. A lot of Black people don't know that they need to know this. And this is where you run into a real serious situation. If I said to somebody in New York, the neighborhood would really look a lot better if everybody got out every morning and cleaned off the sidewalk. Now, I don't have to tell that to my mother-in-law. Right. Doris Wilson would get up in the morning and sweep off the sidewalk. Try to tell that to an African American, they're gonna tell you, I pay taxes, I do this, I do that, and I do the other. So therefore, they would rather sit there and look at how terrible it is and talk about how bad it is and talk about how they neglect, instead of turning around and taking their own neighborhood, coming together and doing what needs to be done, and still by the same token demanding service. So there's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance that we have going forward, that maybe we need to like start sharing what it is you know and what it is we know, because we need to get that together. That's the melding that we don't have.
Really, really agree with you.
Yeah, Ms. Delon Wilson hit it on the head. Not just the dissonance, there's also a cognitive bias between the African Americans and the African diasporans. We need to work together to plug that, because the day we do, that's the day even the motherland in Africa will begin to change.
Right. Yes.
So on this election, it's very clear, the fact that this race is so close, almost down the middle, is very clear that in spite of COVID, in spite of how Trump had handled or not handled the COVID pandemic, in terms of the racial, how do I put it, the racial divide, not racial divide, disenfranchisement and so on. And then with the election, it's very clear that people that voted one way or the other, they're voting on opposite issue, right? So when we talk about the agenda, it's very clear that race is not the concern for people that have voted for Trump. Race is not their concern. So, and whether they're all racist or not, it's not the point. But it's very clear that they're not interested in sharing. It's very clear they don't want to pay their fair share of taxes. It's very clear that they don't support, minimum wage or living wage, because if they're voting on those sensible agenda, we would see, something that's different from the way this election has turned out. But knowing that those issues that matters to majority of us, unfortunately, they call us Democrat or Republican. I was saying that earlier. The two-party system is not the issue. There are overlapping issues. But what's very clear with this election, I'll let you guys weigh in on this critical, what I'm saying right now, it is clear to us that they don't care about us. Us not in terms of just people of color. No, that's not it. There are white Americans that, of course, a lot of them are Democrat, and they're voting along sensibility. They're voting for living wage. They're voting for paying your fair share. They're paying for racial harmony. They're voting for racial harmony. All those issues that the international community is looking at and it's expecting something different. So this election has spoken to that no, there is nothing different. There is the us and the them. So I'll give this to Chooks. How do we go from here?
Well, first of all, very important topic. Actually, I think you need to devote one of your entire program on that topic. And in fact, as soon as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris gets sworn in, I would actually recommend you do a segment on this, because it will be the hot topic for the next couple of months going into the inauguration. I believe Stephanie said earlier that the Black community are not monolithic. That is the key word. I will share a personal story that occurred in 2004 when I, with the Latino community, were trying to put together the largest immigration rally here in Washington, D.C. Initially, it just started up 7 people. And then we found out that there was a massive interest in that nationwide. So something we thought we could do, and it was just going to be, our projection at that time was 10,000 people, 15,000 people, spread so fast, we ourselves couldn't even manage the speed at which it was growing. And by the time all was said and done here in the DC area, just in the DC area alone, 500,000 people actually came to the rally. But during the rally, while we were trying to speak, I was in line to speak. Jesse was in front of me. Sorry, Jesse was in front. Our captain was behind him, and then behind me was going to be the late Senator Kennedy. And a media person walked up to me and said, "I look around." Actually, these are called the Washington Examiner, just to give them credit. I said, "I look around, and I only see Latinos. What is a Black man doing here?" And I said, well, this Black man actually is more related to the Latinos because of the issues that I have. But then I pointed to Jesse and Al Sharpton. I said, but I'm also related to them because of my skin color. So, and this guy, it took him a while before he could understand what I meant. So the Black community is not monolithic. And ADGG, we welcome Blacks to actually infiltrate the Republican Party. Somebody needs to neutralize that party in terms of diversity. And if we don't allow our people to engage within the Republican Party, we won't even know what they're doing, right? So half of the things we know about Trump, we know because we have people there. So Blacks have issues that are not mainstream to the Democratic Party. And those that are on the Republican side have issues with some of the ideologies that make up the Democratic Party. So one thing, if I get the chance to make any recommendations to the Biden transition team, they need to laser focus on what those things are. And they're well known. They're well known. They're not things that are taken from the pie. Let's not focus on Trump. He is completely different. You know, he's in a special mental class by him. But the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, Republican Party of George Bush, trust me, there are fundamental things that they have that we can come to the middle and work together on.
Right. Let me just say this to you, my brother. I'm sorry. Understand that the Republican Party, and I call them the Republican Party, that you see now was not the Republican Party started by Abraham Lincoln specifically to free the slaves in 1854. This Republican Party that you have now is what happened when the Democrats got mad at Lyndon Baines Johnson for signing the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and all the Democrats left the Democratic Party to get into the Republican Party to try to flood the Republican Party to vote Johnson out of office. It didn't happen, it backfired. But the thing about it is that when they infiltrated, then the people who were Republicans all of a sudden found out that their party had been taken over. They then went and became the Republicans, the original Republicans went and became Democrats. So they flipped the script. And my father was furious because my dad was a Republican, a Lincoln Republican. The Lincoln Project that you hear about so much are those guys who stood for the principles of Abraham Lincoln and refused to allow it to go, you know, to die out. We have, Bookie, we really need to set up a new blueprint. And that just means not everybody is an electrician, like not everybody's an activist. Not everybody's a teacher, just like not everybody's a carpenter. but all of us have things that we can do to contribute. And that's what Garvey's magic was about. He didn't say that you had to be an intellectual in order to understand what he was saying. He said, this is what we need to do so that your kid, when he goes out and he opens his mouth, he sounds like a person that's got an education, even though the school down the street didn't teach him. We are now going to take over that. We need now, we can negotiate with them, but they have an old saying, pray for peace, but pass the ammunition. The ammunition is, while we are saying that this is what we need from you, we're not sitting on our hands waiting for you to bring it. We are also at the same time developing what needs to be developed. I think that's one of the things that I tried to say about Africa having the Chinese come in and infiltrate and bring all of their stuff and come up with usurious interest rate loans. Let them bring the stuff in, learn how to fix it, learn how to repair it, and then kick their butts right back out. We need to do the same thing. We need to understand that maybe there are things we need to know in order to be autonomous in this country. And so therefore, maybe there's some key white people we can learn it from, but once we learn it and build a critical mass of those of us who can do it, then you cut the ties and you continue to progress and grow. We always want them to like us. As you have seen under Trump, when he started fanning the flames of a particular group of rednecks that are endemic to the South, the minute somebody gave them permission to be who they were, they came crawling out under every rock and every piece of woodwork that they could, because all of a sudden he was lifting the rules that said, you cannot say this about Black people. You cannot do this to Black people. He lifted the rules. What he did was build his own little army of white rednecks. While we're sitting up here talking about what he can't do, he was doing everything right that even white people claimed that he couldn't do, he was doing. Right. By the same token, we're saying to ourselves, we can't build, we can't grow, we can't design, we can't educate, we can't resist. We keep telling ourselves the most negative things, and we keep saying we can't do it because of them. No, we can't do it because of us.
Right. And we've been talking definitely. I think we're so beyond that at this point, though, and not just hope.
I hope you're right, Bookie. I hope you're right.
We live in the United States, but we think global. When we talk about policy recommendations, when we talk about sharing knowledge, when we talk about building this capacity that we're talking about, the diaspora is so important to Africa as well. You take the Nigerian government, for example, and I'm not even just talking about the Nigerian government. There is so much, knowledge that the diaspora could share with the government. The way the government, has been representing Nigerians, I mean, as you can tell, up to date, it's not working. So there is a need for sharing that knowledge globally. There is a need working together, building capacity globally to even help, again, government on the ground, also recommending policy or working with the Biden-Harris policy. That's where we are now, is a global community. We're not just talking. We need to bring our experts to the table to make sure that they're part of the decision before the decision is being part of formulating this policy agenda before it's being, passed into law. And that's where we're starting. One thing I also wanted to add from my experience in Philly for 4 days this past weekend till Tuesday morning. Gloria, we went in a particular neighborhood, and I want to really give a zip code here because I was really I was shocked by what I saw. So the zip code is 19124 in Philly. I'm not sure what
going around Oxford Circle. That's going toward Franklin.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My hotel was in downtown, in the city hall. I was staying at the Notary City. I was staying at the Notary Hotel, and this is about 10 minutes drive from, giving you the context. And the level of poverty that I see in this neighborhood, not even just talking to people, just look at the infrastructural damage on the buildings, a lot of the buildings, and looking at the streets, I couldn't believe that I was in America. I thought I was in some shanty town in South Africa or some shanty town in Nigeria. So we're knocking on doors, we're asking these people to vote. And a lot of them didn't answer the door. The one that answered reluctantly. And one man says, my wife has been hounding me to vote, but we've been voting for so long, nothing has changed. We're changing parties from Republicans, changing candidates and so on. They're all white men, whatever. But what is going to change for us? When I look at that neighborhood, Gloria, I look at multi-generational poverty, and I'm sort of agreeing with the man. Like, voting is not the only way to create change because it hasn't really worked for them.
That's what I said.
That particular community, I don't see any economic mobility. Like 3 generations ago, or 3 generations from now, when you look at the physical structure, are you asking people to vote that's what's going to bring change? That's also a lie. I'm not saying don't vote, but we need to move beyond that. How do we actually, elect people and actually do the work to impact change in that particular community that they're mostly probably essential workers. They don't work virtually. So that to me was a really stark, shocking difference between where I was staying in the city and 10 minutes drive away, as if I was in another, parallel universe somewhere,
Okay, now do you remember NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement?
Right.
What did the North American Free Trade Agreement literally sucked the life out of the factories and industries in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania,
Right.
New Jersey, New York, all of this going up and down the railroad. If you go down the coast, okay, Philadelphia was the hardest hit, primarily because one, Philadelphia was the target, because out of all of the cities, we are in the north, we are the city with the largest Black population, bar none. New York has a large international population with Black people. Philadelphia has the largest Black population. When they closed down those plants and all those jobs were sent overseas, and it was deliberate, it didn't have to be that egregious. People that could moved out to move to where they could find jobs for their families. Those who could not were stuck here. Then they brought in the drugs. Of course, that's the next natural thing. Teachers moved away because they didn't have any way of continuing to teach in the schools. This, what you see around Philadelphia, and I wrote about that book. I'm gonna send you a copy of what I wrote, because I said I could look at Philadelphia and see that the desecration of Philadelphia was deliberate. No other state has the devastation in the Black communities and the white communities. It's not just the Black communities that Philadelphia suffered. Philadelphia was like the epicenter of industry.
Right.
And I mean, when I stayed here, when I went to Lincoln University, I could come to those same neighborhoods that you're talking about now, pristine, clean, nightclubs, restaurants, beautiful areas, garden areas. When I came back to live in Philadelphia 30 years later,
Right.
I wrote about this about 3 years ago and said, this had to be deliberate. There's no way in the world that an entire community could have gone through such a negative transformation without it being deliberately done. And I'm still right. Philadelphia, by the same token, just so you will know, this city has the largest number of streets named for Black heroes. Practically all of Philadelphia, you have streets that are named for Black people who have done things. You've got Hansberry Street, you've got Addicts, all of these different streets were named for Black heroes as they were coming up. Didn't just happen overnight, didn't happen during Black Power. So what has happened is, when I say people are demoralized, I mean just that. I sat down one time and interviewed a lady who gave me such a terrible scenario and what they went through to get the schools integrated back in the day. They kept doing it, and then the government would come in and undo it. And by the government, I mean Harrisburg, not Washington.
So Gloria,
and what we have now is a situation where it is overwhelming. There's a neighborhood that you don't go into unless you have to, and that's where you were.
and I was walking the streets of, like, I don't really feel comfortable here, and I hate.
Well, there's nothing to feel comfortable about.
Well, this has been a pleasure. I'm gonna, Stephanie, are you still on? I'm gonna have you give some closing thoughts, and we'll go to Chooks, and we're.
Can I ask Stephanie a question though before she gets Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay, so when you're dealing with policy, or is it primarily political, or are you dealing with other areas or arenas that policy have to do with, like healthcare, education, other things?
Yeah. So the subject matter is healthcare equity. So anything from telehealth, what's going on with COVID, you know, the disparate impact of COVID on African Americans, maternal mortality and how it affects Black women, that level of policy. And then obviously you have to engage people on the Hill because, you know, you want them to pass bills that are going to be more inclusive.
All right. One of the things I would like for you to look into, because you really know what you're talking about. I love hearing you talk.
Oh, thank you.
I actually spoke with Obama about this a long time ago, and I sent a memo or a letter actually to President Biden, and that had to do with stem cell. Now, we have Black people who are suffering from some of the most debilitating diseases on the planet that can be cured, completely remedied, and reversed by stem cell. But it is not covered either in the ACA or in Medicare. Something as simple as arthritis. However, what I'm beginning to learn is that does not portend for the white side of the group. Somehow they're able to get it covered. Now, somewhere in there, there's a big disparity. And so we're the ones hobbling around with the cane. We're the ones taking the massive pain pills. We're the ones that cannot get the kinds of services that we need. And then on top of that, we are being, the main thing that does really work is being withheld from us. There's got to be something in there that says that this disparity on the face of it and intrinsically needs to be dealt with.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Definitely, we have to come back. You know, we can get together.
I just want to put that on Stephanie's plate. So now, thank you, Stephanie. Okay.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into that, and then I'll send the information via Bukola so she can send it to you. But just something to think about as we all, you know, travel through our neighborhoods. I don't know if people are noticing this increase in DaVita dialysis locations in Black communities.
Yes.
Have you seen that, Chooks? Have you seen that, Miss Gloria?
Yes, I have.
So DaVita dialysis, you know, I guess offices are popping up like liquor stores, right? And specifically in Black communities. And you have to ask yourself why, right? Because, you know, there is a healthcare business, but because we're so disproportionately affected, right, with health conditions and, you know, not preventative measures, this is like now the last straw, right? Now you got to get dialysis. People are making money off of the backs of our poor health. So just something to think about as we move forward. The only closing remark that I would have is that, you know, to Chuk's point and even Ms. Gloria's point about Black conservatives, you know, I love Black conservatives. I mean, I'm not a conservative, but I think that they're so important to the discussion. And if liberals or Black Democrats and Black Republicans would sit across the table and talk about what is in the interest of Black people, I do think that there could be a happy medium. What we're seeing in like a Candace Owens or Herman Cain, you know, former Herman Cain, God rest his soul, and a Ben Carson. To me, those are not really Black conservatives. Those are not the ones that I grew up on. Like a Michael Steele is someone who is, you know, a centrist. Exactly. Somebody that you can sit across the table with, who can respect you if you're on the other side and come to a happy medium. So the Candace Owens of the world, those are not the people we want to engage, but I do think the Republican Party has created the narrative, or the media, or whatever politics, the landscape in general has created this narrative that somehow we are enemies, and we're really not. Right. We just have different approaches, I think, to the best interest of what's going to be for the racial group. So I would like to see that moving forward in a Biden-Harris administration, that real Black Republicans step up and be engaged, and we can engage them as well. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah, that's it. If you got to move on. That's it.
Those are like policy focused agenda. We should definitely come back or have a follow-up session on that to really discuss that and come up with a paper and then, you know, engage the Biden-Harris administration. Yeah. Go ahead, Chooks, please. Last word.
So it's been a pleasure. Very nice topics. Very engaging platform. Hopefully, we will continue this conversation. For closing remarks, I just think we need to step back, take a look at what has transitioned, especially with what over 160 million people voting. That is unprecedented in the history of the United States. That is over 67% of the electorate voted this time. Nobody's ever achieved that. Yes, I am sure Trump will claim that he is the reason for it.
He probably is.
But he did not know that, of the few things he achieved, he did achieve waking us up, and people did wake up. So once the results are announced, I think we need to begin to cross our T's and dot our I's and itemize those core things, not the selfish things, right? I talk to my kids about difference between need versus want. Let's forget the things we want. Let's just look at what is needed as a community, right? For those of us that are African immigrants that came here and found our path and are well-to-do, no, we're not talking about individuals doing well. We're talking about communities, like the community that Shonuga talks about that she saw in Philadelphia. What can we do from our suburbs, from our skyscrapers out of New York City? How can we come together, engage, and speak on behalf of those people? Because that's where the real needs are. So I hope we'll come up with a short list, something we think Biden can swallow, something that Kamala can go batting for us. But that's what I want to do, and that's what we're planning to engage in the next couple of weeks.
Something to also partner be on. Be really fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been the African with Bookie Shonuga. We're definitely going to come back and continue this conversation. It's a new dawn, and we must be part of the decision making. We are not bringing a chair to the table. We're actually part of the discussion before it becomes a policy or legislation. Anyway, thank you and see you next time. Have a good weekend, guys. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
You all stay blessed. It was wonderful meeting everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
All of you. Bye-bye.
Same here. Bye, everyone.
Bye.